Hello everyone. Today we're diving into a story about a stubborn city reporter who accidentally wrecks the fence of a quiet Apache horse rancher. She plans to stay just a few days to make things right. But under the burning western sun between laughter and dust, she finds herself losing her own heart. Before we begin this journey, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel Theo. And don't forget to tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what Toa it is where you live. It's always amazing to see friends joining in from all around the world. And now let's begin the story. The Arizona sun was a merciless thing, flat, wheaty, and white as judgment. By the time Aurora Beckett reached San Pedro Crossing, her traveling gown was the color of road dust, and her hat drooped like a wilted flower. She stepped down from the stagecoach, clutching a leather satchel and the letter that had cost her 6 months of begging her editor. The Clarion desires an honest account of Apache life. No embellishment, no hysteria. Honest, she promised. And what could be more honest than seeing it herself? The locals didn't share her enthusiasm. A wiry liveryman leaned against the hitching post, squinting at her with the half-smile men reserved for women who'd wandered too far west of sense. "Ma'am, you sure you're in the right town? San Pedro ain't much for lady reporters." Aurora adjusted her gloves, pretending not to notice the laughter behind her. "I'm exactly where I intend to be. Thank you. I'm looking for a man named Cheno Apache. Owns a horse ranch near the river." The man's grin slipped. "You best watch yourself out there. Folks say he don't take kindly to strangers." "Then we'll get along splendidly," she said, and walked off before he could answer. By mid-afternoon, she'd hired a mule and an ill-informed deputy to lead herself. The map in her hand looked simple enough. Follow the AO, cross the ridge, and the ranch would appear. Instead, the path turned to dry stream bed. The sun set fire to the air, and her guide announced he'd left something urgent back in town. That left Aurora, one mule named Ernest, and miles of shimmering desert. "Marvelous," she muttered, fanning herself with her notebook. "Adventure looks a lot like dehydration." A swirl of dust rose from the east, twisting like smoke. Ernest's braid lurched sideways and decided to flee. Aurora shrieked as the reins slipped from her hands. The mule bolted through a stand of sagebrush straight toward a wooden fence line. "Ernest, stop." "But mule." It did not stop. The fence gave a splintering crack, and a dozen horses exploded from the corral in a storm of pounding hooves. Aurora clung to the saddle horn, dust, until Ernest stumbled to a halt beside a watering trough. When the dust settled, she saw him. A man stood by the broken gate, tall and lean, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hair bound back with rawhide. His skin held the bronze hue of sun and wind. His eyes were a calm gray that made her feel suddenly transparent. He said nothing at first, just surveyed the chaos, then turned that steady gaze on her. "I hope Aurora managed. This isn't your fence." "It was," he said. His voice was low, precise, like a man accustomed to wasting neither words nor effort. "I pay for the damage," she said quickly. My mule was startled by the weather. He looked at the cloudless skies. "Weather seems peaceful enough." Her cheeks burned. "I'm a journalist from the Clarion." He was hoping to. He raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "You can explain later. First, you fix what you broke." "Fix? Surely there's someone I can." "Money don't mend fences thesis." "I beg your pardon." He picked up a post with one hand, set it upright, and met her eyes again. "Work does." Aurora stared. No man in San Francisco had ever spoken to her that way, calm, certain, as though he expected her to listen. She wanted to argue with you, but the horses still milled loose across the pasture, and her pride wasn't about to let her appear useless. "Fine," she said, gathering what dignity she had left. "Show me how." They worked till sundown. Work, of course, meant she handed him nails and tried not to faint in the heat while he did the mending. He moved with quiet precision, muscles flexing beneath sun-worn skin, not once glancing her way, unless she got in the path of his hammer. By dusk, the corral stood whole again. Aurora's gloves were torn. Her skirt snagged and her city sensibilities lay somewhere beneath a pile of fence dust. The man Chanoa, she assumed, poured water from a bucket, offered it silently. She drank, trying to pretend she wasn't trembling. "Thank you," she said finally. "I'd like to return to town now." "It's 15 millas north," he said. "You won't make it before dark." Her heart sank. "Then what am I to do?" He nodded toward a small bunkhouse beyond the corral. "There is a cot inside. You can sleep there. Tomorrow we'll see if you still want to talk." Aurora opened her mouth to protest, but the exhaustion in her bones answered for her. "You're very sure of yourself, Mr. Chenoa." "I'm sure of my horses," he said simply. "The rest we'll find out." The bunkhouse smelled faintly of dust and pine soap. Aurora unpinned her hat, shook loose her hair, and sat on the edge of the cot, replaying the day in disbelief. In her notebook, she wrote by lantern light. "The people of the desert speak with the patience of stone. They listen more than they talk, and when they do speak, you feel the weight of every word." Outside, she heard the steady rhythm of hooves, the soft murmur of a man calming his animals. It was oddly soothing, a low voice against the rustle of wind. She set down her pen and smiled despite herself. Maybe the liveryman had been right. She had wandered too far west of sense. But sense, Aurora Beck had thought as she blew out the lamp. I'd never gotten her anywhere interesting. The rooster crowed before sunrise, though, judging by the darkness outside the bunkhouse window, it might as well have been midnight. Aurora groaned and pulled the blanket over her head. A firm knock answered her protest. Up came Chenoa's voice. "Horses don't wait for journalists." Aurora squinted at the door. "Horses also don't ride for deadlines." Silence. Then faintly she thought she heard him laugh. By the time she stumbled outside, the air carried that sharp, clean chill that comes just before the desert burns into day. Chenoa was already in the corral, moving among the horses with a quiet grace that made everything he did look deliberate. A teenage girl, Ka, he introduced her later, was pouring feed into troughs, quick and efficient. Ka studied Aurora like one might a peculiar bird. "You're the lady who broke the fence." Aurora straightened her hat temporarily. "She talks fancy," Ka said to her uncle. "Reckon she can hammer nails." "Reckon we'll find out," Chenoa said. Aurora sighed. Delightful. Eve always wanted to learn carpentry before breakfast. Chenoa handed her a set of gloves and a pail of nails. The gloves were stiff and enormous. She looked like a child playing at work. "Hold the post," he said. Tic-tac. Aurora planted her feet, wrapped her gloved hands around the wooden beam, and promptly tipped sideways as he swung the hammer. The post wobbled. "She is kicked." Chenoa stopped mid-swing. "You planning to dance with it?" "I'm bracing," she insisted. "Looks more like surrender." He set the hammer down, came around behind her, and repositioned her hands. His touch was brief matter of fact, but warm through the gloves. "Here, lower. Don't fight it. Used balance." Aurora swallowed hard. "You give all your guests this much personal instruction." "You don't have guests." If the words were simple, but something in his tone made her glance up. His expression was unreadable, eyes fixed on the post. She didn't ask what he meant. They worked in relative silence after that. The sun climbed, bright and merciless. By noon, Aurora's palms stung, her back ached, and her pride was in tatters. When they finally stopped, she collapsed against the fence and muttered, "You run this ranch or some sort of penitentiary?" Kaya grinned from where she sat on a rail, chewing a strand of hay. "Penitentiary pays better." Aurora flicked dust at her boot, which only made the girl laugh harder. Lunch was beans and bread eaten on the porch steps. Chenoa didn't say much. He rarely did, but he listened as Aurora, half delirious from heat, filled the silence with nervous chatter about San Francisco. The clatter of carriages, the smell of newsprint, the awful coffee at the Clarion office. When she paused, expecting polite disinterest, he asked, "You like it there?" She blinked. "The city?" He nodded. "Sometimes it's noisy and alive, but they don't think much of women with opinions." He took a drink of water, then said quietly, "Out here, people don't think much of anyone with opinions." Aurora tilted her head. So, what do you do? It looked out toward the open plain where the horizon shimmered. Work. Let the rest talk themselves tired. She smiled, realizing they might not be so different after all. That afternoon, she was assigned to brush down a mare named Lark. The animal regarded her with mild suspicion. All right, Lark, Aurora murmured, holding the brush like a weapon. We're going to be friends. Lark disagreed. The moment Aurora moved behind her, the mare flicked her tail, smacking a face full of dust into Aurora's mouth. She sputtered it, waving her arms. From across the corral, Ka whooped with laughter. She likes you. Aurora spat grit. Sis showing it poorly. Chininoa approached unhurried and took the brush from her. Jure moving too fast. He stroked the horse's neck. Slow and even. They read what's in your hands. I was holding a brush, not a confession, she grumbled. He glanced at her, feigned amusement in his eyes. Doente matter. Hands tell the truth. Aurora wanted to argue, but the mare had already settled, leaning into Shanoa's touch. He handed the brush back. Try again. She did, and this time Lark didn't flinch. The rhythm of the brush strokes calmed her. Aurora exhaled, surprised at the peace of it. See, Shanoa said. You listen better when you stop talking. That's rude, she said, twanging despite herself. True, though. But ask, the sky burned copper. Aurora's arms hatched. But there was a strange satisfaction in seeing the corral repaired. The animals come. Ka set at supper a pot of stew that smelled suspiciously like last night's beans, improved only by hunger. They ate together at the small table inside the ranch house. The room was spare but clean. A shelf of books, a few photographs, a handmade saddle hanging near the window. Aurora found herself glancing around curious. Who took those? She asked, nodding to the photos. My brother, Genoa said. Before, he stopped, then shrugged. Before he left. Cat chewing bread, said softly. He was Ma's brother, though. Aurora sensed a boundary she shouldn't cross, so she only nodded. They're good pictures. After supper, Ka excused herself, muttering something about letting grown-ups argue. Aurora laughed. Do we argue often? Chinoa leaned back in his chair. Not yet. The lamplight softened his face, the angles of cheek and jaw, the small scar above his eyebrow. Aurora realized with an unwelcome flutter that she was studying him the way she'd study a story, searching for the part that made sense of the rest. Thank you, she said at last, for not sending me back to town. He looked at her for a long moment. You still might want to. You don't scare easy. He noticed. Their gazes held steady, curious, not yet dangerous. Then Cheno rose, collected the dishes, and said, Work starts at dawn. Aurora called after him. Is that a threat or an invitation? He paused at the doorway. Depends if you're staying. She smiled into her cup. Then I guess it's an invitation. Outside, the crickets started their evening chorus, and somewhere in the dark, a horse snorted softly. Aurora opened her notebook by lantern light. Her handwriting looping on key evenly from exhaustion. He speaks little, but every word lands like a nail driven straight. True, impossible to pull free. By the third morning, Aurora decided that dignity was overrated. Chide blistered both hands, burned her nose, and ruined one really good skirt. The only thing she hadn't managed to ruin was her stubbornness. So when Chenoa saddled a chestnut gelding and prepared to ride the north pasture, she followed him to the corral, notebook in hand. I've watched you for 3 days, she announced, breathless from trotting after him. I think I'm ready to learn. He adjusted the cinch without looking at her. Learn what? How to ride, she said, properly. A journalist should experience her subject matter firsthand. He gave her a sidelong glance. You planning to write about horse sweat and sore bones? Possibly. Ella make it sound poetic. That turned her half a smile. The rare, reluctant kind that flickered and vanished. Wingberry's gentle, he said, nodding toward a pale bay mare tied nearby. But she's got opinions. You two might get ice. Aurora eyed the animal skeptically. She looks harmless. Looks deceive. Ka appeared at the fence rail, grinning. Jure going to ride Winberry. You should get a doctor. Go find your chores. Chanoa told her. The girl smirked. Yes, sir. Ella start digging the reporter's grave. Aurora sniffed. Jure both delightful. Chanoa led Winberry into the corral and held out his hand. Left foot in the stirrup. Hold the horn, not the reins. Aurora gathered her skirts, placed one boot where he pointed, and tried to sing up. She made it halfway before losing balance, landing with an undignified thud. Grasfell, Chanoa said mildly. I was testing gravity, she muttered, brushing dust from her sleeves. Still works. Try again, slower. The second attempt went better. She found herself perched in the saddle, braceless, but triumphant. Winberry flicked an ear as if unimpressed. Chanoa handed her the reins. Now breathe. She feel what you feel. If you're tense, she'll think there's danger. I'm perfectly calm, Aurora said, though her white-knuckled grip betrayed her. Then release your death hold. She loosened the reins. The mare shifted it in sensing freedom and began a slow walk. Aurora's heart soared. I'm doing it for now. Chinoa walked beside her, one hand on the bridle, explaining how to guide, how to signal with knees and pressure. His voice was low and even, and she found herself relaxing to its rhythm. This isn't so hard, she said. Don't say that, he warned. She take it as a challenge. As if on cue, a jackrabbit darted from the brush. Winberry snorted and broke into a gallop. Aurora svieketh. Henanoa, hold the horn, he shouted. Lean forward. Don't pull back. But panic had already taken her. She yanked the reins, the mare leapt faster. The wind tore at her hat, her hair streaming loose. How do I stop this thing, she screamed. Chinoa spurred his gelding, closing the gap. The two horses thundered side by side, dust cloud rising behind them. He reached for Winbu's bridle, muscles straining, voice come even now. Let go, he ordered. Let go. Are you insane? He said, let go. He caught the reins just below her hands and pulled hard. The mare skidded, stumbled, then halted. Aurora lurched forward and would have gone leaping if Chanoa hadn't grabbed her around the waist. They froze, breath mingling. The world suddenly silent except for the horse's snorts. His arms were firm around her. Hairs clutched his shirt for balance. You all right? He asked. I think so, she said weakly. Then she realized how close they were. Her palm braced against his chest slid slightly and met solid, very human warmth. Startled, she flinched, pushing him away with more force than intended. He stepped back just as quickly, eyes widening. Oh Lord, she stammered. I didn't. Man, you startled me. His mouth twitched somewhere between embarrassment and laughter. He noticed. Aurora felt heat rush to her ears. That was undignified. Kept you alive. Dignity is overrated. Easy for you to say you weren't the one shrieking. He heard, he said dryly. The whole valley heard. For a moment they just looked at each other. Awkwardness dissolving into reluctant amusement. Then to her surprise, he laughed a low, genuine sound that seemed to start in his chest and warm the air between them. Aurora blinked. Was that an actual laugh? He nodded once. Seemed appropriate. Well, she said, trying to regain composure. I'm glad I could provide entertainment. Entertainment? Education? Same thing. By the time they led the horses back to the corral, Ka had returned, eyes bright with mischief. What happened? He heard yelling. Aurora shot her a look. Your uncle's horse tried to murder me, Winberry. Ka snorted. Cesa saint. You must have offended her. Chanoa busied himself with the saddles, pretending not to listen. Aurora crossed her arms. Your sympathy is overwhelming. The girl grinned. You're still alive. That's worth something. After lunch, Aurora sat on the porch steps, nursing her pride and a cup of lukewarm coffee. Her head was gone. Her hair hopeless, but she couldn't stop smiling. The memory of Chenoa's arms around her, pure reflex, or not, lingered in a way she couldn't write down. He joined her quietly, carrying 2 apples. He handed one over. "Peace offering," he said. She took it. "For scaring your horse half to death." For trying, they ate in companionable silence, watching the afternoon light drift across the plain. "I suppose," Aurora said at last. "That was what you'd call a successful lesson." "I'd call it survival." "Same difference." She glanced at him, eyes bright with teasing. "You make a very calm rescuer. Panique was das energy." "You're impossible, so I've been told." They shared another small smile, half challenge, half something luster. Later, as she wrote in her notebook, Aurora tried to describe the sensation of riding, the thunder of hooves, the rush of wind, the dizzying mix of terror and exhilaration. But every sentence turned toward him, the way his voice steadied her, the rare laughter that still echoed in her ears. She tore the page out, crumpled it, and started again. "There is a kind of silence that doesn't frighten you. The kind that listens, that waits. It's the sound a man makes when he's sure of the ground beneath him." She set the pen down and stared at the horizon, where the last light was fading. Somewhere behind her, she heard the low hum of Chenoa's voice as he spoke softly to the horses in Apache. The syllables were foreign yet gentle, like water over stone. Aurora smiled to herself. Maybe she hadn't come west just to write about the Apache after all. Maybe she'd come to learn their language, the one that had nothing to do with words. For nearly a week after the writing lesson, the air around the ranch seemed lighter. Aurora worked without complaint, though she often caught herself glancing at Chenoa when she thought he wasn't looking. It didn't say much, but his quiet felt different now. Less like indifference, more like patience. Can notice before either of them did. "You're smiling again," the girl teased one morning as they loaded hay. "Careful, Uncle might think you enjoy this." Aurora rolled her eyes. "Don't be absurd. I merely appreciate survival." But that night, after Kaya had gone to bed, Aurora sat at the table finishing her notes and found her hand lingering over Chenoa's name. She shook her head and closed the notebook fast. Ridiculous, she told herself. You're here for a story, not a man. The next morning, her story came back to bite her. Aurora had sent a few pages of her early observations, mild, harmless things, she thought to her editor in San Francisco through the telegraph office in town. She hadn't meant to stir trouble. She simply wanted him to know she was alive. But gossip in frontier towns traveled faster than the telegraph wire. By mid-afternoon, a writer arrived from Rollins Junction waving a copy of the Clarion's latest edition. The headline read, "Lady Reporter Embedded with Apache Rancher." Below was a sketch badly drawn, but close enough to sting, of a woman in a skirt standing beside a man who looked suspiciously like Chenoa. "Can read it aloud, with aged." Aurora snatched the paper, face pale. They weren't supposed to print it. He never used names. Chenoa took the paper from her gently. His expression didn't change, but the air around him did. Quiet, sharp, like the second before thunder. "People in town talk," he said simply. "They think you're here living with me." Aurora's throat went dry. "I can fix this." "EAJ write again." "EAJ explain." He folded the newspaper once cleanly. "The buyers from Tucson can let their order this morning. Said they don't want to deal with a ranch mixed up in newspaper business." She reached out, but he stepped back. "Canoa, I didn't mean I know." His voice was steady, but it cut anyway. "You wanted a story. Now you have one." Then he walked away out toward the stables, leaving her standing with the paper trembling in her hands. The sky darkened early that day. A wind from the south rose, dry and restless, stirring dust into the air. Aurora watched from the porch, sick with guilt. She wanted to follow him to explain, but words felt useless now. Dinka burst from the barn. The young colt spooked. They busted the pen. Aurora didn't think. She ran. The wind had turned fierce, dragging sheets of dust across the open ground. "Trao vite." She could see Chinoa already on horseback trying to round up the frightened animals. "Stay back," he shouted, but she ignored him, her skirt whipping around her legs. A wall of sand hid like smoke. Aurora ducked her head, coughing, eyes stinging. The air roared, and somewhere in the chaos, she heard a hoarse, whinny, a high, terrified sound. One of the colts had broken away toward the mesa. Chinoa galloped after it. Aurora, half blind, stumbled into the saddle of Windberry, the only horse still tied, and followed. The mare bolted into the storm. She couldn't see more than a few yards ahead. The world had turned to a blur of red and brown, the wind screaming in her ears. Her heart pounded with one thought. Don't lose him. Suddenly, the ground dropped, a dry wash cutting across their path. Windberry slid to a halt just in time. Aurora gasped, clutching the horn. Through the haze, she glimpsed Chenoa on the opposite bank, dismounting. He waved her back. "You shouldn't have followed," he called. "I wasn't about to let you disappear into a sandstorm." Before he could argue, another gust tore through, and the colt's crows echoed nearby. Together, they managed to corner the terrified animal between them. Hinanoa moved slowly, murmuring in Apache until the colt quieted. When it was calm enough to lead, he turned to Aurora. "There is an old land shack east of here. We waited out." The shack was half buried in sand. Little more than 4 walls and a roof, but it kept the wind off. Chanoa tied the horses and shut the door against the storm. Inside, the air was dim and heavy with dust. Aurora sank to the floor, shaking. "Is it always like this?" "Not always," he said, kneeling to check her arms for scratches. "You're bleeding." She glanced down at her scraped wrist. "It's nothing." He tore a strip from his kerchief, tied it neatly around her hand. His fingers were rough but careful. "Thank you," she murmured. He didn't answer. Only the wind howled outside, the sound strange and alive. Aurora Siberev. "You're angry with me." "I'm not angry." "Yes, you are. You just hide it better than most men." He met her eyes, then dark, unreadable. "Anger doesn't fix fences either." That line, calm and familiar, made her laugh despite herself. "You're impossible." "Maybe, but you're reckless." The words held no heat, only worry. He hesitated, then draped his coat around her shoulders. The gesture silenced whatever apology she'd been about to make. For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm beat against the roof. Sand hissed under the door. Aurora watched the flicker of lantern light across his face, the strong line of his jaw, the quiet focus in his eyes. "Finally," she said softly, "I came here to write about your people, to prove something to the world. But every time I try, I end up writing about you." He looked at her, then really looked, as if weighing truth against pride. "And what have you written that you make me furious?" She smiled faintly, and curious and braver than I meant to be. A muscle worked in his jaw. Then slowly he reached out, brushing a streak of dust from her cheek. His hand lingered, fingertips warm against her skin. "You talk too much," he said quietly. "I'm a journalist. It's in the job description." He didn't answer. The silence between them deepened until it felt like a heartbeat shared. Then he leaned forward and kissed her softly, hesitantly, as if asking permission. For a second she forgot the storm, the world, even her own name. When he drew back, she laughed shakily. "Should I write that part, though?" "No." His thumb brushed her chin. "Some stories belong only to the ones who live them." The storm raged on into the night, but they spoke little. Aurora drifted half asleep against his shoulder, listening to the wind. When dawn came, pale and cold. The world outside was covered in a thin crust of red dust, silent and new. Chenoa saddled the horses while she packed her notebook. Neither mentioned the kiss. Some things, she decided, didn't need words yet. As they rode back toward the ranch, the morning sun broke through the haze. The land shimmered gold again, as if the storm had never come. Aurora looked at Chenoa and smiled quietly to herself. He noticed, but didn't ask why. Maybe he already knew. The desert had a way of pretending nothing ever happened. A week after the storm, the fences stood repaired. The ski was clean, and the air smelled of moss wet and dust again. But inside Aurora's chest, the air still hummed with something unspokenly spoken. She and Chenoa worked side by side each day, polite but careful, like dancers pretending the music had stopped. The memory of the storm of his coat, his touch, his lips hung between them in the quiet. Can noticed, of course. 16-year-olds notice everything. You two are acting strange, she declared one afternoon, leaning against a hay bale. We're not acting anything, Aurora said briskly. Come matter. That's the strange part. Aurora ignored her and bent over the ledgers on the table. Chenoa had asked her to help with the ranch accounts. It was safer work than repairing fences. Numbers at least didn't stare back at her with unreadable gray eyes. But she couldn't focus. Something in the figures didn't add up. She frowned it, flipping through pages. Is you sold 4 colts to a man named Pritchard last month? Chenoa nodded from where he was mending tack out of Tucson. Well, according to this receipt, he sold the same horses again those days later to a buyer in Bisbee for twice the price. Chenoa straightened slowly. That's not possible. It's written right here, she said, tapping the paper. Kaya peeked over her shoulder. So he's double-selling Aurora's instincts, the ones honed in newsroom backrooms and dark city streets, sparked awake. Or he's setting you up. That evening they rode into town. The streets of Rollins Junction buzzed with Saturday noise. Wagons rattling, lanterns swinging, the smell of tobacco and sweat. Aurora felt the old thrill of a chase. She hadn't done investigative work since leaving San Francisco, but once a reporter, always a reporter. They found Pritchard in the saloon, fat and smug, drinking with 2 drovers. Aurora strode in first, chin high. Mr. Pritchard, I believe you owe this rancher an explanation. He blinked, then sneered. Well, if it ain't the newspaper lady. You sure do like sticking your nose where it don't belong. Apache en el azar, she said sweetly. Chenoa stood behind her, arms crossed, quiet as a storm on the horizon. Pritchard glanced at him, swallowed hard, and tried to regain his swagger. Whatever problem you think you got, Missy, you best take it elsewhere. I will, Aurora said, pulling a folded paper from her satchel. After you explain why you forged my friend's signature on these, the room went still. One of the doors whistled low. Pritchard's jaw tightened. That ain't the proof. Oh, it will be once the territorial marshal reads it, she said. Is quite interested in people who defraud veterans of the Apache campaigns. It's bad press, you see. The man blanche. You wouldn't. Try me, she said, voiced like a knife wrapped in velvet. Being here, Chenoa murmured, Aura, she didn't look back. It's fine. I'm only threatening mild civic justice. Pritchard sputtered, then finally snatched the papers from her hand, scrolled his mark across them, and shoved them back. You got your apology, he muttered. Now get out. As they left, Ka, who had sneaked along despite orders, whispered, that was awesome. Aurora grinned. That's journalism. Back at the ranch, the tension between her and Chenoa finally cracked. He was quiet through supper, then said, you didn't have to put yourself in that. I didn't put myself anywhere, she replied. You were being cheated. He looked up. You still think the world listens when you speak? Yes, she said simply, if you speak loud enough, he exhaled half a sigh, half a laugh. You're trouble, you know that. Frequently told, so, she said. A beat passed, then softer. You didn't need to fight my fight. She met his gaze. Maybe I wanted to. That silenced him. Over the next days, rumors about the saloon confrontation spread through Rollins. So many folks admired her. Others whispered that a white woman defending an Apache rancher was unnatural. Aurora refused to hide. If anything, the gossip made her bolder. She wrote a letter to her editor, a real one this time, telling him the previous article was printed without her consent, and that she was staying to finish the job properly. Then she wrote another story anonymously for the local paper in Rollins. The headline read, Honest Hands, Hard Land, the Ranchers Who Build the West. She wrote about Chenoa's herd, about the precision with which he trained horses, about how much labor went into each fence and gate. She didn't name him outright, but anyone within 50 millas could guess. When the piece ran, copies sold out by noon. For the first time since the storm, Chenoa smiled when he saw her. Not politely, not carefully, but real. You wrote it fair, he said. Even the parts you didn't like. That's the job, she replied. The truth's not much good if it's only half told. Estile, he said, tilting his hat. He didn't expect to see my brand in print next to poetry. It was prose, she said. Barely. Felt like poetry. The compliment landed harder than it should have. That night, under a moon sharp as glass, they fixed the same section of fence she had once destroyed on her first day. The air smelled of cedar and rain far off in the hills. Chenoa drove a nail into the post, then handed her another. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away. You've done enough here, he said finally. You could go back east, finish your article. I could, she said, but I'd rather see how it ends. He looked at her, expression unreadable in the dark. And if it ends badly, she smiled faintly. Then I'll write it beautifully. For a long time, they worked without words. Only the steady rhythm of hammer and wind filled the night. When the last board was set, she leaned against the fence, breathing hard. Seems I have a habit of breaking things to mend them again, she said. Chenoa set the hammer down. Then you'll fit right in, how so? This land's full of fixing sink. The line hung between them, quiet and true, she laughed softly. Then maybe I belong here after all. He met her eyes and for once didn't look away. Maybe you do. From the porch, Ka's voice broke the moment. Hey, if you two are done fixing fences, maybe you can fix the water pump, too. Aurora turned startled and saw the girl grinning in the doorway. Go to bed, Aurora called. Kaya laughed. That's what you should be telling, Uncle. Chenoa grunted. She's going to get herself sent to boarding school. Aurora chuckled, the tension easing. She's just got good instincts. Too many, he said, but his mouth curved into a reluctant smile. Later, when the house was quiet, Aurora lay awake on her cot, watching moonlight strip the floorboards. For the first time since coming west, she didn't feel like an outsider writing about other people's lives. She was living one messy, stubborn, unfinished, but hers. She thought of Chenoa's voice when he had said, maybe you do, and the warmth that came with it. She didn't know what to call this feeling. Love, respect, something wilder. But she knew it was real. And if there was one thing she trusted more than ink and paper, it was what was real. By the time June rolled over the valley, the ranch looked different: a dire fence, fuller corral, and a certain calm that hadn't been there before. The same could be said for Aurora. She'd been at Chenoa's ranch for 3 months. Long enough to stop flinching when the rooster crowed and to drink her coffee black without complaint. Long enough to realize that her dresses would never be dust-free again. And long enough to know that her heart was exactly where it wanted to be. Each morning began the same way. The smell of hay and sunrise. Chenoa already outside saddling horses while Ka teased him about his hair or his stubbornness or both. Aurora would step out onto the porch, tucking her notebook under her arm, and he'd look up just long enough to say, "Morning, Aurora," in that soft gravel voice that still made her stomach flutter. That was all she needed to start the day. One afternoon, Ka found her scribbling at the kitchen table. "You still writing about us?" The girl asked, leaning over her shoulder. "About life." Aurora said, "You just happen to be in it." "Uncle, to." Aurora smiled. "Especially your uncle." Kaya giggled. "Then don't make him sound too serious. It's not that bad." Chenoa's voice came from the doorway. He heard that. He stepped inside, dusting his hat. "We're taking the horses to the river tomorrow. You should come." Aurora looked up from her papers. "As an observer or a participant, both," he said. "You still ride like a sack of potatoes. I resent that." "You should. It's true." The next morning dawned cool and bright. The river shimmered between cottonwoods, and the horses splashed in the shallows as they drank. Aurora wore her riding skirt and the same battered hat she'd bought her first week. She had no intention of embarrassing herself again. Chenoa handed her Windberry's reins. Let's see if you remember. Aurora mounted with practiced ease this time. Ka applauded theatrically. She didn't fall. Progress. Don't tempt fate, Aurora warned. Chenoa swung up beside her, his movements effortless. We'll take the lower trail, he said. Stay close. I'd rather lead, she said, lifting her chin. He raised an eyebrow. You sure? Absolutely. They started down the trail, the horses' hooves stewing softly against dry earth. For a while, the only sound was the creak of leather and the distant trill of birds. The land rolled away around them, sage and sunlighty and ski without end. Aurora felt something swell inside her, quiet but fierce. I never thought I'd belong anywhere that didn't have a roof higher than 2 stories. Chenoa glanced at her. You do now. She smiled. You always wish this generous with compliments. Only when they're true. Halfway home, Windberry picked up speed, trotting into a playful run. Aurora gasped, gripping the horn. I still don't know how to stop properly, she called. Chenoa laughed, chasing after her. Then don't. The words carried on the wind half challenge, half invitation. Aurora leaned forward, laughing too, letting the mare run. The world blurred into color. Gold grass, blue sky, the rhythm of hooves and heart. When they finally slowed, both were breathless and grinning. Chenoa rode up beside her. See, you stayed alive again. Barely, she said, pushing hair from her face. He leaned closer, eyes warm. You're learning from a patient teacher. Patient? He echoed, chuckling. That's a first. That evening, they ate supper on the porch. Kaya had gone to visit a neighbor, leaving them alone for the first time in days. The sky stretched white and red, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang. Aurora leaned back, sipping coffee. You know, she said lightly. I think I've collected enough material to fill a book, about us, about this place, about what it means to start over. He looked at her for a long moment. You started over the day you broke my fence. She laughed. So many beginnings come disguised as disasters. Most good ones do. They sat in comfortable silence after that. The air was soft, the kind of quiet that carried more meaning than words ever could. Finally, Aurora spoke again, her voice gentler. Do you ever think about leaving? Seeing the cities, the world. He shook his head. This land raised me. It's got my roots. And me? She asked before she could stop herself. He turned to her then, eyes catching the last light of day. Jube got my heart. Seems like that's enough traveling for me. She couldn't find a clever reply, so she reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers curled around hers rough and sure. Later that night, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. Aurora stood by the window of the bunkhouse, watching lightning flicker along the far hills. She heard the door open softly behind her. Chenoa stepped inside barefoot, shirt sleeves rolled. You should sleep, he said. I will, she whispered. I just like watching storms when they're far enough away not to scare me. He came to stand beside her. Jube changed since the last one. Maybe, she said. Maybe I finally learned to stop running. He touched her chin, tilting her face toward his. Or maybe you just found something worth standing still for. Aurora smiled. Maybe both. The thunder rumbled low, far off, as he kissed her slow and certain like the settling of dust after rain. Morning came washed clean. The ranch shimmered with dew. Kat returned before breakfast, chattering about neighbors and gossip, and rolled her eyes when she caught the way Aurora blushed every time Chenoa looked her way. About Time, the girl said under her breath. Excuse me? Aurora asked. Nothing. Just glad my uncle finally has someone who talks as much as he doesn't. Aurora laughed, tossing her towel at the girl. Go feed the chickens, you menace. Later, Chanoa found her near the corral, notebook open on her lap. A leaned against the fence. Writing again. Used notice, she said. Thoughts I don't want to forget. Like what? She read so softly. Love is not thunder or wind. It's the steady sound of hooves beside your own. A smiled slow and genuine. That sounds like poetry. It's prose, she said, teasing. Barely. A climbed into the saddle and extended a hand. Then come write some more of it out there. She took his hand, let him pull her up behind him. The horse started at a slow trot, their laughter mingling with the morning air. The trail stretched ahead, white and golden. Oro leaned into him, the rhythm of the ride familiar now, steady, free, and alive. He came west for a story, she said softly. Chenoa turned his head just enough to hear her. And what did you find? A life worth living. He smiled, eyes on the horizon. Then we're both exactly where we ought to be. The sun climbed higher, painting everything gold. The ranch, the river, the open sky, all of it belonged to them now. Not by claim or paper, but by the simple act of choosing to stay. And as they rode on, the sound of their laughter rose with the wind, echoing across the wild land that had first brought them together, two hearts on horseback, heading toward whatever tomorrow would bring. Thank you all for riding along through this tale of sunlight, laughter, and love out on the western plains. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time with another adventure, another heart, and another wide open ski waiting to be explored.